So, you decided to work on your first ever game or your first commercial release. But first, you wanted to know which is the best game genre in order to make that sweet money. Well, you're in the right place. The best options are horror games and roguelikes. If that's all you wanted to know, then you're welcome. I will really appreciate a like before you leave. But if you want to actually understand why that is the case, let's talk a little bit about that. For this video, I'm going to create two different rankings, one for your first overall game and one for your first commercial release. But what are the things that we should consider in order to rank these genres? Well, if this is a commercial release, then the most important aspect will obviously be the money. Because trust me, you are not gonna make the same amount of money if you are working on a platformer or if you are working on an RPG. But that is where the second thing comes into place. Because an RPG is way more difficult to make than a platformer, so we should also consider the difficulty and how long it would take to create a game in this genre. The third thing that we should consider is how easy it is for your game to go viral if it is a part of this genre. For example, horror games have a tendency to go viral because streamers love playing them. And that is because viewers love watching their streamers screaming or crying out of fear. Meanwhile, if you're making a platformer, unless it's a rage game, you're not gonna go viral. And then there are other things that we should consider, such as how long your game is gonna be. Because for example, creating an extra hour for an RPG would take much longer than creating an extra hour of content for a horror game or a roguelike. So now let's get started with the ranking with horror games. As I already said in the intro, this is one of the best genres for both the first game and the first commercial release. And that is coming from someone who absolutely hates horror games. If I play a horror game, I will probably have a heart attack and die on the spot. But today I'm gonna try to be objective and talk well about them, even though I hate them. So, what are some of the positive aspects about horror games? Well, if you check this graph from howtomarketagame.com, you can see that horror games are towards the center when it comes to income. That means that you probably won't make millions like with other genres, but it will be a really nice extra income to consider. The second aspect that we have to take into account is how easy it is to make a horror game, and that is really easy. With modern game engines such as Unity or Unreal Engine, especially Unreal Engine, you can make a horror game in just a few weeks or months, and you can really easily recycle all the elements that you use. For example, all the music, all the mechanics, all the sounds are usually the same for these games. It's just the setting and the story that change. So you can easily create more and more games recycling all those elements in order to release as many as possible. Because I think that releasing many small games is the best option in order to survive in the game dev field, rather than hoping to be part of that 1% that creates Phasmophobia or Lethal Company. As for how easy it is to go viral with a horror game, this is an easy S tier again. The only problem with horror games is that there are so many out there, so you're gonna need a really interesting idea. But don't worry, because I actually have a video on how to come up with better ideas for your games that you should definitely check out later. So, with all this being said, horror games are going into an S tier for a first game because you're gonna learn a lot, and into an A tier for the commercial release because even though it's a really good genre, the median income is not as high as with others. Next, we have RPGs. I really don't understand why so many people start making games and their first thought is, oh, I'm gonna make a 20-hour long RPG. It surely won't be that difficult. Well, I have bad news. It will be extremely difficult. RPGs are towards the top when it comes to income, but that is because they offer so many hours of gameplay. But in order to create 20 hours for an RPG, you're gonna have to work on it for years. So considering the amount of hours that you're gonna dump into the game, it's just not worth it. In fact, it's so bad that I'm gonna create a new ranking just for it, which is you should avoid it at all costs. Next, we have another super popular genre amongst game developers, which are shooters. You probably played tons of Doom, Halo, or Call of Duty, and you thought, well, I love those games, they made millions, why shouldn't I try to make a shooter game? I mean, it's not the worst option, but just look at the huge amount of FPS that are being released every year. If we consider the difficulty, it is a good genre because it's really easy to make an FPS, but that is exactly the problem. There are so many people out there creating basic FPS and releasing them to Steam, which means that people no longer trust in the FPS games. From time to time, one release may go viral, such as Superhot, but I bet you cannot name 5 different FPS made by an indie studio or solo developer that went viral. And that is because people are gonna stick to the classics. They're gonna prefer to play Call of Duty number 30 over your game that they never heard about. Another aspect to consider is that you may want to make it online, which is something that I don't recommend at all. If your game is more like Left 4 Dead rather than Call of Duty, where players play together against the AI, then that is not that big of a problem. But if you wanna make a competitive FPS, then that's just not gonna work out. So, with all this being said, this genre is going into D tier for your commercial release and into C tier for your first game overall. Just because you're gonna learn all the basics about 3D games and most likely Unreal Engine or Unity, which, by the way, I'm gonna release a video about the best game engine for you, so you should probably subscribe if you're interested in this topic. Next, we have strategy games. I'm gonna group RTS, Forex games, city builders, and tycoons into this category. First, let's talk about the money. It is amazing. All these subcategories that fit into the strategy genre are towards the top of the list when it comes to median income. So if you have the resources and knowledge, absolutely go for it. But that is the problem. You need resources because if you're a solo developer, I will never recommend strategy games. The amount of depth that these games need is huge. You need to balance everything perfectly, create tons of content, which will require their own art, their own systems to work, etc. So for a small studio, maybe it's a good idea, but as a solo developer, it's probably not the best. That changes if you have an idea for a small game that is highly replayable. Take Stacklands or Terra Cards, for example. These are relatively small, really replayable games that you can still fit into this genre, and both made quite a lot of money. Also, while these games won't go viral like horror games, they have a super dedicated community that will play almost every single release. So for the commercial release, this is between A and B, depending on your studio size and game idea. And for the first game, it will go down to D, just because it's extremely difficult, so I will recommend having tons of experience before trying to create a strategy game. Now we have the 2 most popular genres for indie game devs, and the least popular amongst gamers, especially on Steam. I'm of course talking about platformers and puzzle games. And well, puzzle platformers, of course. If we are talking about the first game in general, these are both amazing genres where you can learn the basics of game development and game design. In fact, I'm gonna give them both an S tier for your first game. The only disadvantage in the case of puzzle games is that, well, you need to design puzzles. So if this is not your kind of thing, then this is not a good idea, obviously. I am definitely not smart enough, so I will most likely never create a puzzle game. But if you wanna make money, then I would absolutely avoid both of these genres, because they are extremely unpopular amongst gamers. And you may think, well, but what about Celeste or Super Meat Boy? Yeah, those made millions, but you're not gonna make Celeste. This may hurt your ego, but you should never compare yourself with the top 1% of anything. In the case of puzzle games, it's similar. There are so many out there that making something unique that will stand out is nearly impossible. So this is going into D tier for the commercial tier list. Next, survivals. Who doesn't love playing Ark, Rust, or Project Zomboid with their friends, right? Personally, I love survival games. It's probably my second favorite genre after roguelikes. I love the grinding, I love building bases, etc. And the money is good. It's actually quite high on the list. But once again, if you're a solo developer, it's just too difficult. First of all, most survival games are 3D. If you make everything from scratch, it will take ages just to get the assets ready. And if you decide to go with a 2D survival game, these games require tons of depth, just like strategy games. Because if you create a basic game with hunger, thirst, and a health bar that go down, and you have to eat and drink every 10 minutes and that's it, no one will play it. You need a building system, enemies or other threats, and a motive for the player to stay alive. You also probably want it to be online, which, as I said before, is extremely difficult. With all this being said, I think that as a commercial release, supposing that you have previous experience, C tier is the best choice. It is not as bad as a platformer, but not as good as a strategy game, since the difficulty is similar, but it is harder to find small, interesting ideas. If it is your first game overall, just don't. I mean, never let others tell you what to do, but it's probably not gonna work out. Now we have a genre that I personally don't like, but there are many fans of it out there, and that is simulation. Simulators are tricky. The good thing is that you don't need an idea. You can take anything on Earth and turn it into a simulator. And by anything, I mean anything. Like, two of the most popular games in this genre are a Goat Simulator and a Goose Simulator, which is just mind-blowing. Bravo to the developers, but like, why do people play these things? Now, if we are talking about money, they are once again towards the top of the list. And on top of that, as I said, it's really easy to come up with ideas. But there is a catch, as always. You have to be an expert on the field you're making a game about. And that is because if someone is playing, for example, a truck driver simulator, they are gonna know everything about trucks. So you have to know everything as well. If someone is playing an airplane simulator, they wanna feel like they are pilots. Because if they just wanted to drive around, they will play GTA, not your game. So you have to offer the entire experience of being a pilot or a driver. With all this being said, if you're an absolute nerd about some specific field, this is probably a B tier, so definitely go for it. But if you aren't an expert and don't want to become one, then I would avoid this genre. And for the first game, the ranking won't really change, because as I said, it's quite easy to make a game in this genre. The mechanics themselves are not complex, it's just the knowledge that is difficult to get. Another genre that's towards the top of the list, income-wise, is Metroidvania. This is an extremely popular genre amongst players, and it is not too saturated. So it's probably a good idea if you know what you're doing. But that is the catch, which is that game design for a Metroidvania has to be perfect. You cannot just draw a random map, divide it into 7 areas, and say, okay, here they unlock this skill, here they unlock this other skill, and here's the final boss. I mean, you can do that, but no one is gonna like your game. The good thing is that from a programming perspective, it's not an extremely difficult genre. So if you actually know how to design a proper game, absolutely go for it. In fact, if that is the aspect that you prefer about games, the design, then this is probably a really good idea. But if you're a programmer and not a designer, as is my case, I wouldn't recommend it. As for the tier list, if you're a designer, then it's an A tier, and if you're a programmer, then it's a D. That is in the case of a commercial release. Therefore, it will have to stay between B and C. For a first game, it's probably an A. As I said, they are not too difficult to make, and you will learn many of the basics, just like with platformers. But on top of that, you will learn even more about game design for future releases. Just remember to keep it small and don't try to compete with Hollow Knight, because you will lose. And we are getting close to the end with online party games. This includes things like Gang Beasts, Overcooked, and probably Among Us. In this case, the multiplayer is not that big of a deal, because you don't need 100 players in the same map. And if people play these games, it will be with their friends, so you don't have to worry about players not finding matches, like an online FPS, for example. On top of that, they are some of the highest earning games, because every time a player wants to play your game, they will drag 2 or 3 friends with them. They are also quite popular amongst YouTubers, because they allow them to play together, which will increase their viewers, helping you get even more visibility. The only problem I see is that you may need a bit more marketing upfront, because while many solo players may search for new strategy games or roguelike games to play, in the case of party games, people usually play them after watching a YouTuber play them before. Other than that, it's an easy A tier, and it will help you understand all the ins and outs of online games, so it's also an A tier for your first game overall. Although it will be a tiny bit lower in this case, because you won't really learn game design, it's all about the social aspect more than the game itself in most cases. Now we have visual novels. They are relatively high in the earnings ranking, slightly above horror games, but there's a big problem, which is that there are so many out there. Every day, there are probably 10 visual novels being released, generated with AI. This doesn't mean that you cannot create a popular one, but it will need really unique elements. You need to be good at writing and good at drawing, but not only good, you need to be different. you need to stand out from all the manga-inspired designs out there. Other than that, from a programming perspective, it's really easy to make a visual novel. I once created a small prototype for one, with no art or anything, and it only took me an hour or so to get the basic system up and running. So, if you're super passionate about art and storytelling, I wouldn't tell you to completely avoid this genre, but I won't recommend it either, and therefore, it's going into the C tier for the commercial tier list. If it is your passion project and not a commercial release, then absolutely go for it. You won't learn as much programming, but if this is the stuff you like, I will say it's a lower A tier as well. I will still recommend looking into other genres though, as I think there are better ways to tell a story that aren't just infinite lines of dialogue. Look at Outer Wilds, for example. Seriously, you need to play that game. If you want to learn about game design, narrative design, and everything involving games, it's an absolute masterpiece. And last but not least is the turn for my absolute favorite, roguelikes. For all the purists that may be watching this video saying stuff like, oh, that is not a roguelike, it's a roguelite. Or, well, actually, to be a roguelike, it should blah blah blah. I don't care. If it includes permanent death or semi-permanent, and random things, I will count it as a roguelike. As I said before, this genre is an S, so let's place it right there at the top, even above horror games. And why is that? Well, first of all these subcategories within the genre are really high earning categories, whether they are dungeon crawlers, deck builders, or whatever. On top of that, and my favorite thing about them, is how easy it is to keep players engaged. As I said at the start of the video, players will unfortunately rank games based on how long they can play them. And while adding an extra hour to an RPG may take months of development, if it is good content and not just filler trash like Naruto, for a roguelike, you just have to make different elements random, and players will try again to see if they get a better upgrade, or a better weapon, or just to see which enemies they will have to fight the next time. Another great thing about roguelikes is that you can turn anything into one. For example, we have Peglin, which turns Peggle into a roguelike. And now there's even a claw machine roguelike, and of course Balatro, which turns poker into a roguelike as well. As you can probably tell, roguelikes are my absolute favorite, and I'm actually working on one that you can find more about here. And for your first game overall, it's also an S tier, because it's a genre where everything is quite simple, and it's the sum of all the different elements that makes a good game. But creating a new skill or a new enemy won't be too difficult on their own. And that is all for this video. The next step in order to create your game will be to come up with a really good idea. So you should watch this video next.